Welcome to the It's Our Life's Work podcast, brought to you by Opus Vitae Construction here in Portland, Oregon.
Are we rolling, Mike? Okay, we're rolling.
Yeah.
Well, Brian of A over A Architecture, Portland, Oregon. Welcome to It's Our Life's Work podcast, episode number 3. You're our number 3 guy, Brian.
Number 3. That
You're our number
I
3
should
guy.
feel good
Yeah.
about that.
That's what everyone says.
Yeah.
The number 2 person, also said that.
Yeah, the number 2 person was pretty excited about number 2. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting. A cool thing you guys are starting here.
Thank you. Yeah, we're hoping that this is the start of a tidal wave of just pure excitement,
Enjoy.
joy,
Yeah.
and fulfillment.
What happens when that wave hits you?
It's just so uplifting. You're experiencing it, but you don't even know what you're experiencing. It's that great.
Okay.
This conversation is going to degrade before we get started.
As a lot of them do, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So, Brian, in your words, describe the first time you met Paul and I.
Oh, well, it's a decently strong memory. So
Huh,
I have that. It was during a lunch and learn for high performance Windows. And I remember being very involved in the discussion. It was from Forfeit 75,
Yeah.
great company that offers a lot of just
Um,
good products. And afterwards, you both approached me and kind of took over my space, and that was okay because it turned into a great relationship. But
So we approach from two
yeah.
sides.
I said, "What's
Called
going on
blindside.
here?" It was everyone else had been removed from the room, and it was just
Big bright light shining
no,
on you.
and I don't even know if you had an idea of what you envisioned, but you had some questions and said that you wanted to connect further, and so we did. Eventually, it turned into our first project together. You weren't at.
We don't mention
Oh,
the name.
okay, yeah, but
Yeah, we were at a different firm.
you were the same.
We were the
and
same,
your
yes.
mentality existed under.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, we met you before we started Opus Vitae.
yeah.
So your relationship with us transcends.
That's true.
I like to think that I encouraged in many ways when you were thinking about starting your business. Had I said different things, who knows? You might,
Right. Maybe
you
you're
might never,
responsible.
you might never have done it to begin
When
with.
you put it that way, Brian, we need to offer you a partnership, I think.
Yeah, I, at some point I felt,
Or
that
at least
was
some
really-
sort of profit distribution, or yeah.
I wouldn't even mind a plaque since you're starting to have those in your office.
He's been thinking about that.
Yes, for some time, apparently.
I mean, it is true though that you caught us when we were thinking about high performance and things of that nature, but we really hadn't developed into concepts or practical realities, and so it's really exciting to know that we're quite a ways further down the road.
Because I think both of you were either studying for or thinking about taking the Passive House exam. Is that right? Or had considered it. I think I had just taken it.
Yeah, that's right. We hadn't taken it. You'd just taken yours and you passed. And I remember saying to Paul, hey, if that guy could pass, we could too."
This will be easy.
Exactly. Come to find out, it wasn't easy.
No.
Yeah.
It was a difficult test.
Yeah.
I'm actually in the process of my recertification, so I'm
Oh, you are.
well engrossed in that now.
Do you remember your answers from the first test?
I wish it were the same, and if it were, actually, I wouldn't have remembered the answers, so it would have been.
Oh, but you know what? Now AIs can help you with that.
So ChatGPT is well versed in the high performance building world. I've actually tested it.
Have you?
Yeah, it is impressively knowledgeable until it's impressively wrong, and
Wow.
so you have to be really careful and think that's with a lot of things like with AI is that it overloads you with information that it's correct at first, then it's plausible, and then you're, whoa, wait, we've not only gone to a place where it's incorrect, but now real problems come with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're still needed.
Good.
Yeah.
Good, because that was one of the things I was going to ask you a little bit later. I'll probably ask it again.
About AI,
And see if your
just to
answer
my
and see if your
answer's
answer is the same. Yeah.
Well, that
it's kinda
answer
like a
was written
deposition.
by AI, so it will be the same.
Oh, man.
No, but Brian, one of my sort of memories of, as we were starting our relationship was that both Paul and I were on this mission to set out to build better things, better being more durable, better being more comfortable, better being less maintenance required. We hadn't got into the healthy building biology stuff at that point, but we were pointed on this thing. And we met you. We were also pointed that direction. And we found that it's like so much easier to like follow or go in line with somebody that's already headed that direction, as opposed to somebody that's going the opposite direction. You're trying to pull them your direction. And so it was a very easy process to start doing projects with you. Or it was a very easy, that's what I'm looking for. It was an easy sell, basically, to start doing projects with you because you were headed the same direction that we were. And in some ways, we're already a bit ahead of us. And we had to catch up.
And some would say still are, but
When you say some,
Yeah. Is that like one of maybe three in the room? Okay.
depends on the room.
So if your parents were here,
that'd be 2 out of 3 or 3 out of the 5.
Yeah, then we're 5 out of 3. Yeah, and I think that's true whether you're talking about, our relationship, contractors, architects, but with engineers, with all of the different subs, and with clients themselves too. Like, it is next to impossible to take somebody from a place of not caring about the performance of something or the health and get them to the spot where we want to be at. It's a very different thing where they're interested and they don't know how to accomplish it. That's where absolutely we can come in and we can, but that alignment of values is really hard to change in the course of a project.
it is for sure. And one thing I've noticed is that depending upon what really matters to somebody, what like where they find value, that's the thing that you can kind of push into a little bit and say, hey, is it a durable structure that's really important to you? And they'd be like, yeah, that's really important to me. It's like, great, we can do a durable structure. And oh, by the way, it happens to also perform really well. Thermally, indoor comfort, indoor air quality, all those things. And then they're like, oh, that's great. But the thing that I really care about is the durability. And if those other things come with it, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But if I was to say, hey, like, who cares about durability? Let's focus on this one thing over here. You're going to lose them because that's not what's important to them. It's this thing over here that's important. And the other things are just good gifts with purchase type scenario.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I wonder, Brian, we have our own story of how we got invested in high performance and then healthy structures. You have your own story that's completely different. How did you end up walking that path? Because when I think of an architect, I think of someone who is very carefully thinking through the structural elements and then a lot of the decorative elements of a house. That is, it's mostly structural and aesthetic. And what you're doing is a far cry from just structural and aesthetic. How did you get there?
The focus on high performance itself,
or healthy, or other things that are driving you now in terms of your own practice and where you want it to go.
I think it's come from a place of wanting to design spaces that I would want to be in and want to be in for a long time. And meeting people, I mean, you mentioned building biology earlier. Through that organization, many people have been left sick by whether not related to buildings and couldn't heal in buildings or sick from the buildings themselves. And I think there's a whole slew of values that all overlap in that space of wanting to do better by just the amount of resources we're putting into things, having those resources be put towards what we're actually trying to accomplish. So if whatever the program of a space is, that you're performing that and you're doing it for a long time. And then also having beauty and craft and all of these things expressing, because that's part of what makes architecture separate from engineering. You know, engineering is the technical aspects of all of these different things that come together, but then how do we make that art also and be a space that does something that is not easy to quantify. You feel good, and you're not even sure why. It doesn't even matter why necessarily, but we know that there's certain things that can lead us towards that type of feeling.
So would you say that what you do is more important than engineers?
No, because engineers, I wouldn't say, and I mean, because if we don't have engineers, we can't do what we're trying to do. Engineering is a very important piece of it, whether it's structural or mechanical or electrical, all of those different things are all part of it. But in some ways, we're the composer of the symphony, right? You got, the contractors, I think, end up being the conductor, and then you have all of the different, you got the violin, and you have the cello, and you have the percussion, all these different pieces. And for it to all come together and be perfect, every one of them needs to be an expert in their own little disciplines. And you need the contractor up there organizing and orchestrating the whole thing. So when do different people come in, and how do you adjust all the volumes? It's a little unfortunate that at the end you take the bow and take credit for the whole thing, even though
that's the best part, actually.
but it needs to be it needs to be written, and it needs to be practiced and performed, and all of these different people come together. And so no, I definitely don't think that you could take out any one of those pieces, whether it's all the way down to whether it's the framing or the plumbing. All of those things come together and are really important in the final piece.
Composers usually get theirs like posthumously. So is that the same with architects? Like, yeah. So I just find that maybe your time is yet to come.
Yeah,
because you haven't died yet. So
Yeah, no. People are really going to care about my work after I'm no longer here.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, right.
Except for hopefully, the people who are in the spaces.
That's right.
I think it matters. I tell myself that. That's how I fall asleep at night. It's like, oh yeah,
I matter, darn it.
No, they're sleeping better, therefore I can.
No, we certainly sleep better with when you're designing projects because of the level of attentiveness you're giving to all of the features that are not just the mechanical features, that are the more felt features and the art of the space and all of that. I'm not at all suggesting that aesthetic value isn't high on the list of things that need to be considered, but when it's considered to the exclusion, for example, of people's health or how they feel in a space, the qualitative feel is different. You do a great job of that.
Yeah, or the durability of the structure, right? We all have seen and worked on projects after the fact that were solely focused on aesthetic, solely. Who cares how the thing's gonna perform and last and the comfort of the people living in there? It's all about the aesthetic and the look. And that's all great in the beginning until somebody moves into that structure and space. And then the reality starts hitting them in bits and pieces, right? First summer comes. Oh my gosh, this is so hot and miserable. Oh, well, it looks good, right? We're happy with it. Then the winter comes and it's like, oh my gosh, don't sit over in that area. It's cold as can be because there's so much glazing and it's low quality glazing that it's just like super cold over there. Oh gosh, our heat bills are really expensive. Oh well, right? And then 5 years down the road, you've lived with those things and it's like, oh, and geez, like we're having window failure. And and the roof leaks, and and then this and then that, and before you know it, we get brought in to fix all those things, right? And what's unfortunate about it is that somebody paid a lot of money for that design and somebody paid a lot of money for that construction, all to be thrown out the window in a lot of ways, so that then the next person could end up paying a lot of money to fix all those things. And the cost to fix those things is 2x what it would have cost to do it right the original time.
That was the first project that we ended up doing together.
That's right, it was.
Which became many projects.
It did.
But it was that classic example of, and whether you like that house or not, it is impressive and it has a stature to it, but it did not exude comfort. And so you have people that bought the house because they liked the quality of it, and it has really clean lines and all of these things, and it was failing in some really key ways. Water management, internal comfort from the mechanical systems, just the way the windows were not protected and failing. And you're right, like not only was it expensive, but you're not able to fix something to get it to look like the thing that failed without having it fail again.
Right.
You can do things that are great from the beginning. And if the clean lines are important, we can work out how to integrate those different systems, because we have to know what those systems are and know that they're going to perform the way that they're intended to perform. And then we can design something that's not exactly that, but it meets those same criteria. But going back in afterwards, you're left with so many restrictions that you're working around. And so you have a client that now is not happy about the amount of money they spend, and they're not happy, fully about some thing that they wish wasn't there, but they know has to be, because that's what's solving the problem that you got brought in the first place.
Right.
And yeah, I would like to not always just have to fix those sorts of things, and just have it where, like we're doing it right the first time.
Right.
And then you can rest, soundly knowing that it's going to be like that, and that whatever changes happen will be superficial things. A new owner comes in and they want a different color or whatever, but it's not the foundation of what that building
Right,
is.
for sure. Or it's understandable that consumables get used, like a roof, right? We put a roofing over a structure, and we know that it is going to basically deteriorate over time, and we know that we're just replacing that little skin every 50 years, whatever it is. That's an acceptable thing. But when major systems of the house failure or are in failure or are inadequate from the word go, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. And I also think that something Paul brought up earlier in another episode was the fact that people don't know what they don't know, right? And people don't know to ask or expect their structures to do these things, because they don't know it's even possible.
Yeah.
Because our industry has done such a poor job of creating healthy, comfortable homes. Most people don't discover how poorly their house performs until they've bought it and moved into it.
Right.
Or they've paid to have it built and they moved into it.
And usually gone through a season or two and understand how different it is at different times in ways that they don't like.
Exactly.
Sometimes all of the seasons are wrong somehow. I don't know.
Right.
It seems like a hard thing to get to, but
Sure. But you think about, like, if you're the consumer, if you're that person, you have this general thought in your head that you're buying this thing or you're having this thing built, and somebody's thought about all that stuff.
Right.
Somebody is like designed in everything to make this house work the way it should and for a long time. And they don't realize that isn't the case typically. That the majority of time, none of those things are thought through. It's like done on the fly. It's, well, this is good enough. Well, yeah, I'm just going to put a sweater on in the wintertime because it's going to be uncomfortable in some areas. Oh, but take your sweater off and you go into that room because it's going to be really hot. And, oh, yeah, like heating air and blowing it from one isolated spot far in a distance all the way to the other part of the house makes a lot of sense in consumption of energy and comfort. Like, it doesn't. That's old technology, and yet that is still what's being put in some of the more luxury homes today. Like, why? We can do better. Like, we can do better.
we do better.
We do better. Yeah, thank you.
And one of the things that I enjoy about this relationship as we develop it is that I don't love the fact that there's a certain status associated with houses of a certain size, for example, but there's a status with a house of a certain size. We are doing everything we know how to do, if we were to talk in terms of status, to make the status be that the house is a better something to live in, a better experience to live in. And our approach to that collectively, I think we would agree, is to make the program of the house a more thoughtful program. When I say program, I mean like the size and how the spaces are used and all of that sort of thing, and allow the dollars to be invested in this smaller space that's more thoughtfully prepared for someone to live in. And I know that's a big thing in the way you design.
Yeah, I mean, it's the foundation to what our approach and methodology is towards projects, is that the baseline for what construction is just so far off from reality. And so people think cost of whatever amount of space they're going to get, and it's a space that is made with all toxic stuff that's put together in a way that's not going to last, that is going to have problems that are foreseeable. I mean, even by meeting building codes, most of the time you're getting spaces like that, new construction that is just really poorly done. And it doesn't benefit any of us. And I think most people, if they understood that when they were buying their homes and had choices, because it's also, if you're looking for a new home, it's not like there's options of something that's 6,000 square feet and another one that's, 2,500, and they're roughly the same price, but one of them has all of, I mean, like those don't exist, like except for the, the custom stuff that we tend to be trying to do. Right. Generally, like it's because our whole mindset is all about size, bedrooms, bathrooms, like how many cars in the garage, not like what does it feel like when you're in there. Are the windows, not only are they thermally insulative, are they acoustically insulative, so you're enjoying that, you have privacy. Are you not just the energy? I mean, we talk about energy a lot. That's been big in the green building world for a while. But even more important, I think, is how it's our effects on ourselves, like the people living in that space. And are you comfortable in it? Or is it conducive to your lifestyle and what you're trying to do? And when you surround yourself with craft, I think it really changes our mindset. And not all of us can necessarily know why, but I love walking into spaces when the plaster, clay or lime plasters that we've talked a lot about in our own conversations, wood floors that are not laminated with plastic, so that you're separating yourself from that natural material, and details that are really well put together and crafted. People will be drawn to them, and then they're drawn to them initially, but I think when they're in that space, it adds a comfort and a sense of ease. And like, how do you put a value on what stress reduction you might have from, like, you can't, like, I can tell you that I think that it's valuable, but like, I don't know how you do that study and who's going to fund it. But the point is that we shouldn't have to, like, we know that the effort and quality that we put into building will make a difference. It's convincing people. And once they're in those spaces, I think they are convinced. It's just how you do it beforehand when they're getting ready to build themselves.
Well, for sure. And it's really hard to explain to somebody, oh, don't worry, like, you're going to love the way this space feels. And they're going to be like, well, how do you know that? And you're like, well, because we know that, like, irregular surfaces and different shades of colors are what you see in nature, which is what we're drawn to and which puts us at ease. And radiant heat is the way the sun heats. And so if we're heating your house with radiant heat, it's going to feel comfortable to you. Like, we can say all those things, but until people experience it, it's a little bit like snake oil salesman, right? It's like, oh yeah, they're just trying to sell me on those things that just cost more. And that's not the case, but it's really hard to get somebody to understand it until they experience it. And it's that concept of, if you build it, they will come, which I believe to be true. But when it's your dollars out of your pocket being put forward to, like, build it and hopefully they will come, and then when they do come, are they going to compare what you're doing to, builder X down the street that is half the price for the same square footage?
Yeah, and mentally that messes with you. That would mess with me. Like I'd be like, how can it be so different? Like, it is that different, and it's not actually that building quality stuff is so expensive, so much as that the things that are not that are artificially cheap.
Right.
And it's externalized so many different things, whether it's degradation of natural ecosystems, just like horrible working conditions, often abroad, but even in the US sometimes, and things that none of us would be okay with if we saw those. If you could play a video of all these bad things in front of someone while they're in that space, they'd be like, I don't know if I want to be a part of that system. And yet we're all a part of that system unless we really try and step out of it. Right. And it is a hard sell, but I think I feel good that when we made that sale, it's worked out and people have been happy and appreciative.
And that sort of hard sell that you're talking about, I want to talk about that a little bit, because we are a young company. We're less than 3 years old. You're a young company also. We have made some decisions, and you've made some decisions about where we will and where we won't point as companies, right? So we have decided that, like Kevin referred to in a previous episode, that we're going to be a best practices only. Now, of course, best practices sounds like we've reached a pinnacle. We recognize that best practice means better all the time. We're incrementally getting better all the time. Right. So that's our approach. Well, best practices in that way is costly. and it's difficult, and it means that we will not gather all clients to ourselves. For example, we will not gather all projects to ourselves, and that means that we're going to be climbing up a hill a lot in order to do the things that we're doing.
And by ourselves.
And by ourselves, right. And the same thing is true.
Well, I'll be with you.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, the three of us would be the three of us.
But you've set a similar course, it sounds, like you're interested in a certain sort of project and you want to make your way away from other projects. That's a difficult thing to do when you're a young firm. Like, how do you work through that?
Well, it is difficult, and I think the answer is that it's not 100%. There hasn't been a project that has everything that we're trying to do. We try to make every project have something, and getting better at, I've talked to Kevin about this, just understanding when people come to us and they want to do a project, how do we quickly get to how many of these values are we aligned with, and making sure that at least there's something strong there, so that we're not doing a project that we don't feel good about just because we're trying to pay the bills or whatever. Because there's the business side of this, which is, I think anyone would get rid of that if we could and just do the things that we love and have, but that's never the reality. And maybe it's better that way. I don't know. It makes us work harder for it, but it's a goal of, like, we know where we want to get to, and we have these set of values that our firm is promoting, which is the health of the building, the consciousness, which is everything from the ecological to the really tracing impacts down all the supply chain, really talking about what's it like for the people building it. The contractors, subcontractors, people in factories, like, are these products that we're specifying impacting in other ways that we're not seeing, even if it's healthy for the end user, which is also important. And then the durability of the structure and having it be resilient to natural as well as human impact over time. So that, if anything is being replaced, it's done in a way that is understood that this is the life of this material. We have a way to replace it, so we know how that's going to happen. Yep. That's thought about. We've also worked on projects together where when that's not thought about and things are, all covered up and it looks beautiful, but it's not so beautiful when something goes wrong. And there's freak things that can happen, and even a perfectly good piece of glass, if somebody it's like it can crack, and then it's like, well, how do you get to that glass? How do you replace it? And if it means that the whole thing has to be taken apart, and all of a sudden a couple $100 for a piece of glass, and there's just tens of thousands in the project to replace it, it's kind of insane when it's preventable from the sense of a design approach to it.
Yeah, infinitely serviceable is what I like to say.
You have said that before, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
Infinitely
serviceable, right? But that's how we should view things, right? So that the structure is preserved, and we can change out the parts that are sacrificial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think to me, I've defined success as when I'm getting more of those projects that are more aligned over time, on an average at least, so that I feel like I'm working towards that place where then, I really have full control.
And if you look down the line, let's say 3 to 5 years, and you could say these ideal projects are coming in that are aligned with what you would want to do, what would they look like?
Well, I think they would all look different from like a physical form sense. I don't want to ever be in a place where I only do that kind of house or something. Like, I like working on varied projects, and there's a consistency to it. I have my own design aesthetic, but what they would all have, I think, is a real focus on healthy building materials, on site-specific design, so that they're designed for the place that they're being located. And in fact, even to backtrack, I would say that the three things that I think are so important in really making architecture of, what make it unique to every project are the people that it's for, the place that it's in, and the time. And so at no point will all those three things ever align again. You're always going to be, you have the same client, it'll be in a different site, or it's 10 years in the future. So things will always change, and you're always working towards those. But if you're always responding to those values as a way to inform your design, and then you on top of that add the values of our firm and trying to create health and things, that'll, I think, be where we're trying to get.
Yeah, that's great.
And if
So-
that happens in 3 to 5 years, is that a guarantee?
So, Brian, question for you, because I don't think that the majority of people understand the nuance here, but can you explain a little bit about the difference between somebody that has studied architecture and maybe is like, drawing house plans or whatever versus a stamping architect?
Yeah, I don't know. Do I know any stamping architect? I mean, they're going through architects, to become a licensed architect, you have to go to an accredited university, take the tests and pass them, and work under a licensed architect for a certain number of years. And there's, if you're coming from abroad, there's some other variations on that path. But a lot of people can get to that point, and then the range of what you're doing with it is huge. I mean, architecture is a very varied field, and there's all of these different parts. It's incredibly complex. It's impossible to be an expert at everything. What we're doing is unique to every project and every person. We're designing things for the person, place, and time. If you're someone that is reviewing other people's plans or doing it on spec or as a kind of a cookie cutter approach to something like that is just it exists. I don't love that it exists. I think it misses some of the real, not just potential, but it creates a lot of opportunity for real negative things to happen in spaces. This is why I think so many buildings are really done poorly. And you can take a building that's done well in Portland, Oregon, and move it to another. It's like you can't design the same way in different places. And if you're doing that without ever having visited those sites or being intimate with the weather patterns, or you'll end up with failure. And buildings look the same. We build almost virtually the same all across this country.
Mm-hmm.
And all that's different is like what company is stamped on the OSB sheathing. And it's like that's not how it used to be, right?
Right.
The buildings used to be very different,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't different just because someone liked different aesthetics. And like the aesthetics always evolved out of functional requirements for building in a place, with what materials they had, with what they needed to do. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it humid? Is it dry?
Right.
And how does that change over the course of the year? So I don't know. Do you know any stamping architects?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
You.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because, in the residential world, there's, folks that draw house plans that are not a licensed architect. And our law here allows for that to happen up to 3 stories or something to that effect. There's some,
See, I didn't even know that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's new to me. So
wasn't that like on the test?
not on the questions I got right.
Perfect. And so what I find happens a lot is that the term architect gets used broadly across a lot of things. And that would bother me if I was a licensed architect. I'd be like, wait a minute, there's a difference between like what it is that we do and the rigorous standards that it took for us to get here versus somebody that didn't follow that path. It doesn't mean that person that didn't follow that path isn't talented in what they do, but it's still a very different thing.
Yeah, it's a different thing. I consider myself a designer first, who has then taken on the added learning and approach to trying to understand the mechanics and the science behind buildings. What the state is mostly worried about, and why it's licensed as a discipline, is they're worried about life safety, which is hugely important. But a lot of the things that, fire, for instance, no one wants to have their house burned down. Like if you build in a way that is in every other aspect align with what we're talking about, like your house succumbing to fire is just not something that is a concern to us anymore. Because it's getting away of light frame construction and into some of these mass systems.
Right.
And even if you're using light frame construction, like the approaches and all the things that you're covering with are making that so unlikely that it's just that's not where I worry about water management. I'm not worried about and I let the structural engineer worried about whether or not they can make the crazy cantilevers that I want to happen hold up forever without sagging.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just sometimes what people say at the end of the sentence. They don't know what else to
I'm gonna
say.
string you along for like 4 minutes of so's. So
Let's. Didn't mean to do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
It's almost like I can play the bongos though. Have that be dramatic. Let's talk, Brian, about the whiteboard collaborations that you and I have back at our office.
are they collaborations? They're mostly
Dictation.
yeah.
I was gonna say tutorials or
One time I got yelled at for the wrong color pen or something, marker.
that was not a
No, they are collaborations. At least to me, they are, Brian. Like for me, that's some of my funnest time with what I do is to like have a problem that we're solving for, right? And then we sit there you have your lens, I have my lens, and we go at trying to solve the problem by drawing it out on the whiteboard and figuring out the best path forward. And it's usually almost always a mixture, maybe 70-30, my side, your side. I'm trying to get to like 80-10 or 80-20 if I can.
Yeah. So that's your goal for 2024.
he's like in like 50-50 or 30-70.
No, but we have two different perspectives that we're trying to solve the same problem. And we by going through those exercises, we end up coming up with like the best solution that we can do with all of the factors that we're, combined and we're solving for this one problem. And that's really a great thing. And that doesn't happen with everybody because there's some folks in the design world that are pretty staunch on this is just the way I do it. And I imagine on the build side too, right? And they're not interested in that collaboration. They're interested in just being like, nope, we've been drawing it like this. Here's our standard details. We've been doing it like this forever. I know
I've been failing forever.
Right, exactly. And it's like, well, the builder may adjust on site or whatever, but this is just how we do it. And it's really refreshing and fun for me to have a different approach to that, where we like come together to figure these things out, so that you're not designing something in a vacuum and I'm not building something in a vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I've appreciated about working with both of you early on. Is there's this foundation of respect. I think Kevin's probably 80-20, but that allows us to have those conversations. And if this stuff was easy, it's like we wouldn't be here. I mean, every time you're changing anything about where an assembly is, what's around it, what's in the assembly, you need to rethink about, well, how is it working? And is it working in the way that you want it to? Mm-hmm. And what will, how are we handling all of the control barriers and is it going to be airtight? Are we worrying about how moisture is getting in and if it gets in, how it's going to get out? Right. And making sure that we're not setting ourselves up for having something that looks like another detail but doesn't perform like it, or it doesn't perform like it because we don't want it to perform like that other detail. I notice now when I go to the office, if Kevin's smiling, it probably means that there's a new section detail or something that's kept that on the
up on the whiteboard already. It's like Brian's gonna get schooled today.
He's got something. He's excited to show us.
If he's frowning, it means he hasn't thought of one yet.
Yeah, it's like, and that's a great it's a great approach to it because it can be done in real time.
Right.
And then we put it into our drawings and make sure all of the thicknesses and everything work out, but you can get the conceptual stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And go through ideas quickly, which is
what's great, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to you drawing something, like you put all this effort into drawing something, you send it to me, and we look at it and we're like, oh no, we need it to be this, and then like we mark it up, send it back in. It's just back and forth that is, kind of expensive and takes a lot of time.
And that's even something, we're doing this with structural engineers now. We do it with you, but when we have some critical detail that we're trying to work out, we can send you a sketch early on, or we can send you the drawing before we've put in all the notation and really finalized it to make it, ready for production, so that you can weigh in earlier. And it's not this, the builder only sees it when it's 100% CD set, and then they get a chance to figure out if things work or not.
Right.
It flows very well into like the pre-construction services that you all offer, and insisting on having this relationship early on, so that we can rely on you as a resource in the project for feedback to make sure things are we've thought about how it's going to be constructed and how it's going to be scheduled with everything else. And are there any things that when you're looking at the detail that you see problematic as to how it's working that we either missed or hadn't thought of, and it just only makes it better.
On the process that you were talking about with, we have a pre-construction process with all of our clients, a pre-construction contract. On your ideal project that you described a few minutes ago, I'm going to use the word integrated design, where there are various parties in the design of the build that all come together at the beginning. Can you speak to what that process is about and why it's important for like clients who might hear this, potential clients?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear integrated design used in different ways too, because sometimes it's used in a design build methodology.
Interesting. Versus
what you're talking about, where there's very distinct entities that have all decided like it's really important for us all to be working together. But in that sense, I think it's absolutely fundamental and it's foundational to how we're trying to approach things, I think, for both of us. Because to leave out some critical person in terms of their knowledge base early in the process, just it means that you're not going to have that until it's a lot more expensive to input whatever their change might have otherwise been.
Right.
So I always recommend to our clients, one, and I think we've talked about this, but hire a contractor start talking to contractors like the same time you're talking to architects and designers. Bring somebody on early, and then the intention should always be that you're keeping them through the whole process, and we're not trying to bid things out to just get the lowest, because the projects I've had that have done that have been the projects that did not turn out well, because you're never getting bids that are the same. People are either they're planning for all the complexities and they're thinking about the unknowns that are going to be in a project, or they're not. And of course we want things to be as inexpensive as possible, and they're never to be an issue. And it's just, we know we can't tell you, who's going to get sick and mess up the schedule, or what product is going to become more expensive than it was when we thought and had it bid. But those things have happened every single time. And things that we don't, you never open up a project and find that it's stuff full of cash, right? Like it's something that's bad always. Like, if you know of a project with that would be cool. But I've never had it where it's like, oh, this just got less expensive. Like it's either what you hoped for, or it's something worse. Like, gosh, there's something we can't move here, or there's rot, or, structural failure.
Yeah, you're right. There's almost never a good side that, you discover, right? Every once in a while there'll be something like, hey, we realize that this other option for material that's really similar was less money, and there could be a little savings there. But for the most part, the surprises are almost always to the other side. Yeah. And that's, and we do our best to try and foresee as much of that as we can.
Or just even to account for it
right.
with contingencies and placeholders and things like that. But
yeah, for sure. And and our budgets are reflective of those things typically. But we can't see it all. And, what is frustrating to me sometimes is people will say like, hey, don't worry, I won't hold you to it. But, what do you think this is going to cost? And I'm like, well, I really can't tell you until we go through that process. And they're like, well, yeah, you've been doing this a long time. You got to know. Right. And it's like, I don't know, because I've never priced this project on your house in this location at this time in history for you before.
And I bet most of the time when you do this, people understand and are.
And they thank me.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, thank you.
Now that I
Um,
understand.
Yeah, some
Now
people
that-
are like, hey, let me write this down. It's really profound for them. No, most of the time they're like, yeah, whatever. just just throw something out there. Just give me an idea. And I understand why they do. Because they're trying to understand. They're self-qualifying themselves, right? They want to understand if what they're asking for or talking about is even in the realm of affordability for them. And I totally get that. And so we do things to try and help them along, like, hey, average for the kind of thing that you're talking about has been this, or historically projects have cost this for what you want to do. But we can't be more specific than that at that time, because without all the information in our hands, we're just guessing.
Yeah.
And if we're guessing, we're likely giving them information that's inaccurate.
It is I mean, it's a hard thing. Everyone will not have another thing in their lives that is like a custom building project. I mean, even something expensive like a car, not only can get a price, but you can get all the options that
That's
you're
right.
considering, and you can
Yeah.
weigh them, and then you can go check out other dealers, and then you ultimately know exactly what you're getting and what it's going to cost and when it will be available within a decently high degree of certainty. And it's none of those things are true when you're building
No.
projects the way we're building them. And
No,
yeah.
you're right. But I would also argue, though, that like if you had a custom car made for you, it's going to feel very much like a custom home,
Sure.
right?
Yes, but I don't know. Do people make custom cars? Oh gosh.
Do you want one?
Yeah. How much is it going to cost?
Kevin's paying.
Yeah, exactly. It's up to you, Brian. It's up to you how much it costs.
Okay.
Depends on the decisions that you make.
But you're right. It's absolutely apples and oranges in every step of the process. If you get a proposal from one contractor versus another contractor, what do they mean by their prices? What are they actually saying they're doing? Is there any material specified in any way on anything? And even if you had very detailed construction drawings that you presented to two different contractors, how they go about approaching those is going to be very different. So just at that very superficial level, it's going to be apples and oranges. And then you talk about multiple layers of complexity beneath that, and it's an almost staggeringly impossible. I understand and appreciate from an owner perspective how difficult it is to try to figure out what's true and what's not true. Who do I believe and not? Which path do I follow? Can I trust this number that's coming at me? All those things, super difficult.
And I have the same thing on my end. I mean, people understandably, as I do too, like if I'm going to spend a lot of money on something, I would want to know what it's going to cost. But it's trying to take a step back and say, we know this is going to be, you're doing an addition or you're building like something, it's going to be expensive. And you don't know how much, we don't know how much yet. That part of what we have to do is figure that out. And it takes us doing some work and the more work we do, we're refining this and getting closer and closer to something that is like, all right, now we know with a good range what this is going to cost. But before that, I think the important thing, and I try to advise people, is, talk to a couple people. Like you talk to me, talk to a couple other people, find someone that you like their work, you like what they're talking about, and you feel like, all right, I can spend the next year and a half talking to this
Right.
person, and that when problems come up, they're going to be someone that's going to work through them with me, because they will come up. It's just a question of like how you're able to manage that. And you do the same with your builder. And if you can find those people that you trust, that do quality stuff and are aligned with what values that you're trying to bring to a project, that's when I think you've set yourself up for a successful project. And it'll never be what you that's the other thing, is like, you want to know how much something's going to cost. The project at the end is almost never what it was at the beginning.
That's right.
You discover what you actually want through the process of doing it, almost always. And so not only, Kevin, are you asked to like price what they're telling you, you have to then also understand what they're going to find that they actually want along the way.
That's right.
And then price that.
Right.
In
Because
your
that's what
head,
they really
on
want.
the
They want to
fly.
know, 2 years from now, how much money will I have spent on this project? Exactly.
Yes.
Well, and we found that in a fairly small space that you and I worked on, where you had a very clear sense in the drawings of how the gutters and drainage were going to happen on the project, and then we realized that was going to have to change pretty significantly. So that was a pretty big change that was driven through. And then we realized there was going to have to be makeup error on this project in ways that we weren't aware of. And those complexities that you come across as you're meticulously waking your way through this build, you just can't see them all. There's no way to do it. It was as we were seeing the parts come together that we were realizing some of the additional complexities.
But I think the reason that all of those things did end up getting solved in a way that I think was nice was because we approached it
Correct.
in that way where you guys didn't just move forward with something. You came, we had a conversation, we talked about all the things, we brought in the relevant subs that were needed for each of those different pieces. We made sure to prioritize, and that's the thing that we're trying to make sure to always remember is like we got to prioritize what it's. If you're gutters, right? Like they got to work as gutters. There's no point in having just metal hanging on the side of your house that's not moving the water into the place that you need to move it to. But within that range, there's a lot of options, and so how do we then figure out to make it as best aligned with that project as we can, and same with the makeup error.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I think that people don't realize sometimes is that custom homes or even renovations or whatever have never been done before. We're literally building a prototype. And one of our project managers is always talking about, well, even Boeing, builds like 3 models before the one that you actually finally see, that you're flying around in.
And the doors still fall off.
Right, exactly. And when you think about that, it's like, we're being asked to build this one of a kind thing that's never been built before. And we should know what it costs, and we should know how long it's going to take to build it, and we should be able to foresee all the things that we're going to run into, and that's an impossibility. And I think some firms like ours put a lot of effort into trying to minimize those things as much as possible through our knowledge and experience and care, and other firms just kind of close their blind eye and just like wing it, and hopefully it works out for the best. And hope's not a good strategy.
No, because often it doesn't. And then it creates those unfortunate situations where, it's really hard, even if you had every right to change contractors in the middle of a build process. Like, there's a lot of money lost in that. There's a lot of time. There's so much frustration. It's just, you never want to get to that place. And same for switching designers. Like, putting the effort up front to find the people that are going to be the ones that you want to work with and that you trust are going to help you through the whole process is really paramount. And so much of it then relies on clients that we get through other clients or through other professionals because of that relationship and the trust that is then being said, we've worked with them or had this experience, and these are the things that came up for us that were unexpected, but this is how they handled it. And they were attentive and professional and respectful and, made sure to fix everything in a way that in the end, it all worked out.
Yeah. So I want to talk about natural materials for a bit. This is an area that we're both passionate about, and having projects with these things in them, recognizing the difficulty, and because of the difficulty, the added expense in using those products, which is somewhat counterintuitive because you think, well, natural products should be less money, right? Because they're just everywhere, and it's nature's creating them, and we're just like harvesting them and putting them into building products. But it seems to be the opposite. And we touched a bit on it earlier, and you spoke a little bit about how a lot of the man-made and artificial materials are like subsidized to cost less than what they do through various ways, be it government subsidies, be it subsidies that societies feel is going to feel long-term by, like cutting down, specific things or using up resources in a way that is using it faster than it can be produced.
Right.
But I wanted to sort of hear from you a little bit about the challenges that you face in that and speccing those products, and then just the frustration that sort of comes of beating your head against the rock a little bit of like, we're trying to do these things that are better for everybody, and yet it's just so difficult.
Yeah, I think there's a couple areas where I feel like I'm beating my head, and because oftentimes, I mean, just to like add into that, but like a lot of times the materials themselves are inexpensive. It's when you're now relying upon someone to apply them by hand, or to do something that is labor intensive in a way that's not the case when it's all done by machinery. And so that's where the expense comes. And there should be expense then, because these are people that you're adding back in the crafts that we have mechanized away, and understanding that there was value in those things. But we'll, especially in this transition where we are working within this pseudo natural conventional like framework where we're trying to combine different things, it can be difficult. It's definitely difficult with respect to building codes. All the time we'll have conversations about something where we're being forced to do something that not only isn't necessary, but oftentimes is counterproductive in terms of the durability of the building. And that's a hard thing, because we're like, well, how do we get around this in a way that we're not building something poorly, but still making sure that it's going to be signed off on by the inspector? So that can be a challenge. It's a challenge of finding people to work with these materials often. And so if there's only a couple people in the city, that inherently is going to make it more expensive. And I think eventually some of those things will change. But anytime you're relying upon people's knowledge and something that's not, done as a kit of parts in a factory, and now it's done on site in a way that is unique to that place, it's going to require humans to do it. And I really think that it should. And I like relying on people's knowledge, especially knowledge that's been passed down and these crafts that people have really spent their whole lives perfecting. And that's where it gets back to this question, Paul, that you had brought up about, well, if we see a value in that, let's invest that into a smaller amount of square footage, so that the space that we're making isn't space that you want to leave. So it's okay that there's not 8 bedrooms, because you just want, the couple that you have, and you get really good, value out of them.
Do you have a favorite project that you're designing right now, Brian?
That's a hard one.
Is it?
It is a hard one.
I don't think it is.
I've got 2 favorites. Can I have 2 favorites?
No, you're gonna have to pick one. Yeah.
Let him say 2. Come on.
It is
Okay.
true that I'm working on Kevin Rose's house at the moment, which I believe is the favorite he wanted me to say. And that project is we're getting close to permitting. Kevin's pressuring us to be even closer, and we're doing our best to meet this deadline. But it's going to be cool, because we're using a mix of these strategies again. We're using the FasWall system for the whole house, and so that wall system will be incredibly durable, and it's the same system all throughout, with just changing the finish on the interior when it's needed, between like the garage or some of the living spaces. It has a simplicity to it, which I think is beautiful. Yeah. We're using radiant heat, and then having supplemental mini splits where necessary, just for cooling. And so I'm excited for that. That's been we haven't gotten the other project we're doing with FasWall, which is the Keach project, that we're going to get to talk about that at some point. That's
we're not talking about that today.
The other favorite has had some real problems with getting FasWall through permitting. So I hope your project does not suffer that same fate. It is in a different jurisdiction.
Yeah, it is different.
And I believe you paid off the appropriate people.
I would never admit to that.
But he's paid a lot of people.
You have paid a lot of people, yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a roundabout way, I think ultimately I have paid off. Yeah. But let's talk about a couple things in relation to my house in particular, because as challenges that you and I have bumped up against, like, neither one of us loves spray foam. But in a conversation we had a couple weeks ago, when we were trying to work through details, like how are we going to do these specific things? And I said, hey, we can use spray foam there. And you're like, yeah, but spray foam's terrible. And it's like, it is, okay? But it's also a tool. And we're not talking about spray foaming the entire house or even large sections. It was 2 small little areas that maybe that tool made the most sense to use there. And because it's used in a necessary scenario when there's nothing else better for it, in my mind, that's an okay thing, right? Life is full of compromises, and we can't do everything entirely as we want most of the time. Usually there's some sort of compromise that happens. And I think that those fair compromises are a realistic part of trying to do what it is that we're doing. Because if we exclude all compromises and we're like, nope, this is our hard line, we're going to do everything this way, don't care, we're not going to get a whole lot of projects, because that just isn't realistic. I think the thing on like my house, it was important for both of us is that we were generally sticking to the principles that we originally started out with. And as it turns out, we don't need to use spray foam there. We figured out ways around.
Yeah, that's what I was like. We took that out of our details. So
I hope
Yeah,
it's
no,
not there
we
anymore.
did, but it was a collaboration, and
was it on the whiteboard?
it was, yeah, but it was
Plug.
no, it was a collaboration. But like you stuck to your guns and were pushing against like, no, we don't, like, Kevin, let us figure out a way to not use the spray foam, even though I would have been okay with it in those isolated instances. And so it was, again, a collaboration that worked out best in the end as we thought through it all. But I think that the takeaway from the whole thing is that we can't be so rigid in our ideology that we're not willing to use some tools as they're out there for us to use in specific things. It's like the bigger picture, right? If we're getting 90% following our principles and 10% doesn't, that's still a win to me. And it's a win because we're creating a structure. It's a 200-year structure, and that spray foam would stay there for 200 years and wouldn't, there would be an initial environmental impact, and then after that, it pretty much goes away.
I would say it's a win for me if it's also in the direction of still always working towards getting away from the things that we want to get away from. Because I don't know if it's possible even to build a house, any building, in a jurisdiction that is going to be regulating it where there isn't some sort of downside to it. And even right now, most of the time, there's decent downsides to it. And if you're talking about getting something that has no negative external impact at all, and I like the idea of working towards that. And even if it's unachievable to get all 100% there, you just have this direction, this something that you're shooting for. And each project will divert. And we've always picked a couple things that, all right, we're going to really try to figure out, can we make this detail better? And when we do, the next project we're able to take that knowledge, because it's never the same situation in the exact same detail, but we've learned something that we can then apply, hopefully. And the more that happens, the more we're pushing ourselves along. And even in getting to the point where when we're discussing with clients, we have those conversations early, because part of it too is there are certain things that are very difficult to achieve with natural materials that might require spray foam in an assembly if it's a certain depth and you're trying to air seal in a certain way. But if the design didn't have that condition to begin with, can we as designers be better about understanding, well, where are those things going to come into play, so that we make sure that never comes up and you're never forced into that question of even needing to use it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so it puts the pressure on you and us, really, right, to try and think through all that stuff. But then comes the X factor that we talk about, which is the client.
Yeah. And it's a conversation with them and understanding, and hopefully, because if they're in alignment, because you've had those conversations early on and they agree in the same things value-wise, and you can say, yes, like what you're trying to do there, I understand it. There's a way we can do something that's similar, that's not exactly this, but that will be what is the difference between us using things in a certain way versus in others. And
for sure. But I guess what I was talking about with the X factor of the client is that there's people that will be like, no, I agree with all that stuff. However, I don't want an induction cooktop. I want a gas cooktop. That's just important to me. And if we were like, going all out with like, no, like we can't burn gas inside of a house, it's bad and stuff, we would lose that person that would that would otherwise allow us to get 95% of the things that are important to us and environment and all that stuff, and release them out into the world where they're probably going to get somebody that's going to do 25% of the things that really matter because they're not us, right?
Yeah, I feel, especially something like that, as long as people are informed and they're making that decision. I mean, like, I love fires. I love fires.
I
Like,
know that about you.
any sort of smoke is not good for you, right? So, like, I make that consciously, saying that, like, I don't sit there like sucking up as much smoke as I possibly can, but at the same time, I understand that, like, any of those particulates in your eyes, in your lungs, or whatever, over time, like, they have some sort of an impact. And with gas, it's the same thing. Like, when you're any combustion inside of your, and especially more so with high performance homes when they're getting tighter, it's you have these particulates that are going to have an impact if that is something that's important to you, because the experience of cooking, which is its own beautiful, healthy thing, that, you know, you could be outside at a restaurant not having any particulate in your home and missing like the family experience of cooking together. It's like, I don't know how you weigh all those things, but you just let people know what we know at the best of our knowledge, and then they get to make that choice. There's other things that I feel differently about when they're making a choice that's harming somebody else, whether it's like the people that are installing, or you know, just any of the external negativity associated with the building supply chain. Like, that's where I feel like, no, we really need to push people in a direction that we're not using these things that are toxic for somebody else, even if it is safe for you in the end. But if you're doing something that's impacting you knowledgeably, then.
Well, and let's be honest. There's a part of all that you're both talking about here, and how you assemble buildings and things, that really does come down to finance, because people have only so many resources to put toward a project, and they can fully be on board with the direction you're headed, the principles you're espousing, the best practices module, and all those things, and they simply can't quite get there, and there have to be shortcuts or not shortcuts, but alternatives provided that will allow them to reach that. Because, sort of like you said, you don't want someone to just flee from working with us in this context to go out there in the market and get something that's cheaper. You would rather have them do a whole bunch of good things, thought carefully through, and then make some educated decisions about what you're pulling out of these projects. And that we hit that every time.
Yeah, I was gonna say it.
Every time.
Every time.
That's not a sometimes, it's an always. And it's just trying to figure out how to do that as thoughtfully as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, it's a bit of a dance, right? It just is. So it's a bit of a dance, Brian.
And dancing is good for us.
It is. Now, there's an interesting story about the name of your company, A over A. And can you share that with us?
Is it interesting, story?
Well, it's just the reason why you came
yeah.
up, and why it's a little a and a big A and all that stuff.
So A over A is a metaphor for investing more and less. It's very much to this same conversation that we've been having, where if you have two things and you've invested in the quality of one and not in the quality of the other, you have the little a, which is the representation for high performance and healthy and durable buildings, and the big A is the developer home that is, you know, rooms and rooms of drywall with tons of space and just toxic everything. And it's having that conversation early on from the beginning, so that people understand that these are not the same. They're not the same things. They're both the same letter, but they're not the same things. And one has a lot of benefit over the long term, and the other one has a lot of downside to it in the short term and in the long term. And for the people that are living there, it's not healthy. All of those materials then end up just becoming pollutants, as opposed to being things that can either be reused or reworked back into the ecosystem. And when we have those conversations, and we say that there's a benefit for you also as the you know, homeowner that's going to be living here, but it's also hopefully aligned with all of these other values about being sustainable in a larger sense in our society. That's where we're trying to get.
That's beautiful. And so I know, Brian, that you don't, like, you have told that story many times, and it probably doesn't like mean that much to you, but hearing it from our perspective.
And now you have it recorded.
Yeah.
I do have it recorded, and we'll change a few words and make it ours, and it'll be
Yeah.
fine. No, but it's powerful because it's right. Like it's a great story to talk about the difference between the little a and the big A and what they represent. And so thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. I've been meaning that. And you got that wooden house, remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I need to get those, because that's what it is to me. It's like these different sizes of, just like a basswood, and one that's walnut, and one that has really good craft. And there's some visual representation of exactly that metaphor to help it really sink in with people, because it's still difficult. Like every time we have that conversation, and even when people agree,
Yes.
then there's still that point. I struggle with this myself even, and like I agree with it, but like it's so easy, and we've been so pressured in our society to like what our standards are. Like house sizes keep going up, and like used to have one bathroom for everyone, and now everyone has to. And then not only that, there's more bathrooms than there are sometimes bedrooms in houses.
Yep.
And all of that can be fine if it's done in a way that is in line with all of these other principles, but so often it's not. So often it's sacrificing all the things that really make space important, and instead, like, there's just more toilets.
Right.
And
There's more crap, literally, right?
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Well, actually, most of them are empty. So like, there's not even.
but like the term I hear that drives me crazy is luxury builder or custom builder. Everybody's a custom
I'll remember
builder.
that if you're ever upsetting me sometime.
Okay, good. And like, it's like, well, so-and-so is a luxury builder because, I mean, they built a 10,000 square foot house. It's like, so?
Yeah.
Like, why does size equate to luxury? And then also, why does people that can put together high-end finishes equate a luxury builder or a high-end builder? Because to me, those things are very different. Like,
Yes.
Like
And
you can pretty much train a monkey to put together high-end finishes. But what's
Almost.
behind and underneath and around that is where the mastery comes, right? That's the thing that's important.
even the term high-end finishes, sometimes I hear what those, and I'm like, is that really? Like,
Well, I know, right?
no,
Because-
but it has this meaning that isn't really the meaning. I think sometimes, like how it gets used and what it's referring to, and what it actually, is that really high end? I mean, yes, it's a finish, I guess, because it's
Right.
the thing that I'm seeing. So that part's true, but I don't know. I sometimes disagree. Actually, oftentimes when I go into, it might even be better described as expensive things
Uh-huh.
that aren't always high end. Because there are certainly high end things that are expensive, and there's high end things. I mean, high end, if high end means it's beautiful and it's going to last a long time and it's going to serve the function that it's meant to function as. There are things that are not the most expensive that are high end.
For sure. I just think that, when you hear that term, it conjures up images in your head of.
I agree. Yeah, I'm trying to push back on
Undoubtedly.
it because,
No, I know.
Because you paid it.
well, yeah,
I know, but I mean, but if we're using jargon that the person out of our industry is using, then we have to kind of sort of, assume that what it means to them, not necessarily what it means to us,
yeah, absolutely.
right? Because we're selling into that market, not to other builders or other architects. We're selling into to clients, and yeah, it bothers me. It bothers me to see that. It bothers me to see that. The barrier of entry into our industry as builders is so low, it's laughable.
Mm-hmm.
Laughable. And it shocks me because what it takes to become an electrician and then start an electrical contracting company is really pretty difficult. You have to pass this test. It's really hard to pass. And that's just one piece of the house. Like, we're in charge of the entire house.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to pass this like ridiculous open book test. It's ridiculous. And then there you get your license. Like, shouldn't there be some level of experience and years of experience and some sort of proven track record?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they have ongoing education requirements, but they're pretty loose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of a joke.
Well, you all are trying to push back on that in your way, right? By bringing back the idea of apprenticing and mastery to the craft of building that
We are.
that exists in some of these other, well, plumbers and electricians and things like that.
We definitely are, which is great, right? But like we're this small company. I mean, I'm hoping to affect the entire industry.
Yeah.
So that we can get away from the concept of like, let's just have people specialize in this one little small thing and pay them less, as opposed to having somebody that masters all these things, like a master carpenter that can do all of these disciplines of carpentry. And yeah, you got to pay them more.
Yeah.
But they're worth it, right? And what they can do is crazy impressive. And those people are constricting in our world instead of expanding, right? I would love to see more kids want to be, like the Norm Abrams from This Old House or the Tommy Silva from This Old House, like these guys that can do freaking anything. That should be the heroes in our world, not, Spider-Man and, the person that has the most likes or, is the, influencer of the day or whatever. That's
What about carpentry influencers?
That could be
there's
good.
a thing.
That probably exists. I don't know.
It could well be.
We might be able to come up with some awesome stuff in that
Yeah.
direction.
Exactly. Yeah.
Edward, would he be into that? Just start filming him and
Maybe, but he's kind of a shy guy in some ways.
Maybe James.
Yeah, I think James would
might.
enjoy that.
Okay.
Could be an influencer.
Yeah,
I'll go
I think
home
he,
back and talk to him
Yeah.
about that.
I think he'd like the camera. I think he'd like camera time.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna leave that here for today, Brian. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for
And
coming.
we'll have you back soon to talk about the project that you alluded to.
Yeah, your number 2 project.
Okay, number 2 project.
Yeah, we'll get that on another podcast. We'll have a podcast specifically dedicated to your number 2 project. So
It is number 2 in a way. It's 2.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Well, thank you. I'm excited for the podcast and continued working with you.
Likewise.
As are
All
we.
of our future projects.
Yeah.
As are we.
Thank you for joining us on our episode today. We had a lot of fun talking with our guests. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be looking forward to you when our next content comes out.